Hello and welcome to an edition of Spectator TV. I'm Katy Balls and I'm joined by Michael Gove and Michael Simmons, two Michaels. And today we're going to be talking about the news that Nicola Sturgeon has announced that she is officially separating and ending her marriage to Peter Murrell, who held a senior role within the SNP. Michael Gove, to begin with you, were you surprised to hear this news? Posted on Instagram by the former First Minister.
I don't think many people would be surprised. I think it was an open secret that Peter Murrell and Nicola Sturgeon were no longer living as a couple, that she had left what had been their family home. Obviously, this follows in the wake of the police investigation into the SNP's finances, Operation Branchform, which resulted in Peter Murrell being arrested. And I think it's also the case that Nicola Sturgeon made it clear at the time that she stood down, which was before the police investigation began, that she wanted to move on with a new phase in her life. So obviously, it's a sadness whenever any marriage ends, but in this sense, it's probably the public setting of a seal on what was a widely accepted separation between the two.
And of course, the backdrop to this is Operation Branchform and the fact that I think over £1.8 million now spent on that investigation in Scotland into potential SNP fraud, over £600,000 of donations. And Nicola Sturgeon's husband, soon to not be husband, he has actually been charged. Nicola Sturgeon was arrested, but then let go. What do we expect to happen here? Do you think this is going to pick up pace, Michael?
Well, the troubling thing, about the police investigation that's now sat with the Crown Office to decide, what happened next, is basically that nobody really understands why it's been going on for so long. The investigation's into its fourth year. All we've had is the charge of Peter Murrell, but that was 9 months ago. And in the last few weeks, two of Scotland's leading KCs have actually made the point that it may reach this time frame where it's gone on so long that Peter Murrell will actually have a human rights defence to say that he's been denied a fair trial because of how long this has been going on for. And legal, obviously it's difficult because you can't really comment much on this live police investigation, but legal commentators who can say the odd thing don't really understand what's going on and why it's taking so long.
And Michael, is this adding to SNP woes? Because, of course, the general election result was tricky. In a way, the party has moved past Nicola Sturgeon, but not so much. It's not really a change of the guard in terms of who has taken over. But yet, their fortunes are looking up a little bit at the moment, thanks to Labour problems.
Yes, you're right. So the SNP had not quite a nadir, but certainly a very bad general election, reduced to more or less single-figure number of MPs in Westminster. But it remains in power in Scotland, remains in power in Holyrood. And you're right, the age of giants, as it were, Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon, has ended with Alex Salmond's untimely demise in North Macedonia and Nicola Sturgeon, of course, demitting office as First Minister. So we now have a team at the top of the SNP who are seeking to ensure that we have or they have an approach, John Swinney and Kate Forbes, which is lower key. And against the backdrop of a Labour government that is facing real difficulties, the SNP's woes seem to pale, I think, slightly in the minds of Scots in comparison. I don't think that anyone could say that the SNP's time in government has been a roaring success, but certainly for Scots who voted for Labour in the general election in order to ensure that a majority of Scottish MPs are now Labour MPs, those voters who put their faith in Keir Starmer seem now to be repenting of that. And that could mean, admittedly, there's still 15 or so months to go before the next Scottish elections start in earnest. It does seem to be the case that the SNP have a potentially new lease of life in office.
And on that, Michael, I suppose Anna Sarwar, I think, really hoped to be Labour First Minister,
yes.
And that's looking harder. And we're seeing him distance himself more. It's not obviously completely unusual for Scottish Labour to take different lines than the main government, but there must be some strain there and frustration.
Absolutely. So Anna Sarwar is undoubtedly a highly effective, charismatic and successful Labour leader, but he's hurpled, to use a Scots word, by the fact that policies that Keir Starmer has had to put in place in order to seek to balance the budget, maintaining the two-child benefit cap, introducing winter fuel payments. These are policies that the SNP government have said that they oppose, and Anna Sarwar has had to adjust his own position to be closer to the SNP on these issues than to Labour in Westminster. He thinks it's necessary for his electoral survival, but of course the SNP can say, well, we're the ones who are setting the pace, we're the ones who are the genuine Social Democrats here. Scottish Labour is merely a branch of the UK party, and you can't really trust them if they're in office to reflect Scotland's wishes.
And yet, Michael Simmons, there's plenty of SNP dirty laundry at the moment. Of course, we've had the passing of Alex Salmond, and his widow has made a rare intervention, which involves Nicola Sturgeon, it seems.
Yep, so this has come about because the Salmond sort of Sturgeon psychodrama has not died with Mr. Salmond. And we've seen just before, in the run-up to his death, Alex Salmond was continuing a court case against the Scottish Government, which friends of his say was an effort to finally clear his name, as he would see it. And since his death, friends of Salmond have said they are going to continue that case. And I think in an attempt to shut that down, Nicola Sturgeon made an intervention at the weekend through a Lunch with the FT interview where she restated, some of the accusations against Salmond, saying that he could be difficult to work with. And John Swinney then repeated that in an interview. And so, as you say, Moira Salmond, who's in her late 80s, has made what I think might be her first ever public intervention, basically to say the hurt caused to her family and could Alex be left to rest in peace. And I think this shows that this drama is not going to go away anytime soon. I also think it's worth pointing out that it's slightly strange for Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney to, say all these things about how they knew about how Alex Salmond behaved back in the day when he resigned in 2014. They were both reportedly begging him not to. So I think, some things still don't add up, and it's not clear if we'll ever get to the truth of who knew what.
Do you think the ghost of Alex Salmond and the ongoing scandal, despite the fact he is gone, Michael, could still scupper SNP, progress in the future? Or does the economy trump, a soap opera slagging match?
Well, I think it's certainly the case that Salmond and Sturgeon were the dominant figures who together piloted the SNP to electoral dominance in Scotland and coming within a few percentage points of securing Scottish independence in that 2014 referendum. And next to them, impressive in their own way, as John Swinney and Kate Forbes are, they don't seem to have quite the lustre and glamour that pair did. But that pair, as Michael has quite rightly pointed out, were involved in a tempestuous psychodrama, which led to Alex Salmond facing criminal charges of sexual abuse. Of course, he was acquitted, but the falling out between Salmondites and Sturgeonites still afflicts the broader independence movement and the SNP to this day. And so it will be Swinney and Forbes's, fervent hope that either Operation Branchform doesn't go anywhere, or that it concludes quickly, that the doings of the past are forgotten, and that at the next election, Scots are focusing on bread and butter issues rather than the legacy of this drama. It has to be said, however, of course, that we don't know what the political landscape across the whole UK and in Scotland will look like by the time of the next election to Holyrood. One, I hesitate to say joker in the pack, but one factor that wasn't there in the past is, of course, reform. Proportional representation contributes to the makeup of the Scottish Parliament, and PR, of course, is a tool that Nigel Farage used in the European Parliament, wants to use in the Welsh Assembly, the Senedd elections, and the indication is that Reform are polling just above 10% in Scotland, and so therefore would definitely be represented in what will be a more diverse Scottish Parliament than ever before.
And I think just on that, Michael, I suppose when you think about the nationalist movement, tartan Tories, then I think under Nicola Sturgeon it was much more leaning into this progressive sense, if you think about some of the agenda she was pushing, of course.
On gender.
Exactly. Do you think that the reform angle is going to pick up some SNP supporters when it comes to that fracture?
Well, one interesting factor in the Brexit referendum was that a significant proportion of those who voted to leave the European Union were people who had also voted for the SNP in the past. And even though the SNP sold itself as the most pro-European party in Scotland, arguably the most pro-European party in the United Kingdom, there are a significant section of its support that were opposed to our membership of the European Union union, particularly for reasons relating to the common fisheries policy, but not only that. And there is an indication that the reform support may well be from people who were perfectly happy with the idea of independence, but also are culturally very much on the right, obviously. And it's always been the case that the SNP has, notwithstanding the social democratic tone of its leadership, had a number of supporters who would be culturally on the right as well. So, the SNP, like Labour, when it comes to the Red Wall, has to be conscious that there are a section of its voters who could go elsewhere.
And just finally, Michael Simmons, not to put you on the spot, but you are manning our data hub. So looking at the various data that you go through there, what do you think is going to happen in 2026?
Yeah, on current trends, I will stick my neck out and say I think that the SNP will retain power because, we have seen this revival of Scottish Labour that, for the reasons Michael set out, towards the end of last year seems to have kind of dipped away. And I think if Anna Sarwar has not been able to cement that and let the SNP sort of retain a lead, it seems like as long as the constitutional question rumbles on, which looks like it will rumble on indefinitely, that just the electoral maths mean, to me anyway, that the SNP will be the largest party in Scotland, in Holyrood, for, a long time to come.
And I suspect that Michael is right. I mean, he's been closer to the data. But I think what we're probably likely to have is, again, a fractured parliament with the SNP not securing a majority of seats, but with their allies from the Greens probably able to continue to govern. And it may well be the case that even if the SNP and the Greens together don't have a majority, that if you had Labour, Liberal Democrat, Conservative and Reform, and the Conservatives are doing better under their new leader, Russell Finlay, than they were just before the election, even then that would be such an unwieldy coalition that one would have to bet that it's probably going to be a Swinney Forms administration after the election.
And the SNP Green partnership didn't end quite as they wanted last time, of course. Thank you, Michael. And thank you for watching.